Okay, so let's unpack this. When most people think crypto, maybe they picture volatile charts, maybe um, NFTs, things like that.
Right, the sort of surface level buzz.
Exactly. But underneath all that, there's this potential with blockchain tech itself, right, to actually reshape some really fundamental systems.
Definitely.
And today, we're going to dig into the source material you've shared on one platform that seems to be pushing really hard on that front, not just as like another coin, but as actual infrastructure
Mhm.
for global finance, potentially.
Yeah, we're talking about Solana.
Solana, right.
Oh,
So our mission here is to look at these sources and try to figure out, okay, how exactly is Solana trying to position itself? Moving beyond the speculation and into real-world applications.
and the sources, well, they lay out a pretty strong case. They talk about some big claims processing thousands of transactions a second.
Thousands, wow.
Yeah, and at like practically no cost,
Right.
driving a lot of the innovation in DeFi, decentralized finance,
Mhm.
making it possible to trade real-world assets on the blockchain, and interestingly, getting some serious looks from, the big traditional finance players.
And what seems really key, um, based on the material, is that Solana was apparently built specifically to solve those big problems.
Yeah.
Speed and cost, the things that hold back, well, not just other blockchains, but even some of our existing financial rails.
Absolutely. The sources suggest it's designed for that from the ground up.
So how does it actually do that? What's the architecture the sources describe that lets it hit those kinds of performance numbers?
Okay, yeah, that takes us into the engine room, so to speak. The material you've got really points to Solana's unique architecture as the fundamental advantage. It's not just tweaking existing stuff, it's a different way of thinking about scale.
And the sources highlight a couple of key technical ideas here, things maybe not everyone's heard of.
Exactly. The main ones mentioned are proof of history, POH they call it, and Tower BFT.
Proof of history.
Okay. So think of proof of history. Kind of like a super fast cryptographic clock built right into the chain. It creates this historical record, like a time-stamped sequence, proving events happened in a specific order.
Right.
And the crucial part is it does this without all the validators needing to constantly message each other back and forth in real time just to agree on the timing.
Ah, okay. So instead of the whole network having to like negotiate the order of every single transaction before processing, POH kind of pre-orders them. Is that the idea?
That's a really good way to think about it. It sort of bakes the order and the timing right into the data itself
Ah,
using cryptography. This cuts down massively on the chatter needed for everyone to agree.
okay.
And then Tower BFT, which is Solana's version of, a consensus mechanism that can handle some nodes being faulty or malicious. It uses that proof of history record. It leverages it to agree on the state of the ledger really, really quickly and efficiently.
All right. So you combine POH's timing with a fast consensus like Tower BFT.
Uh-huh.
And that's how you get the crazy transaction speed. And because it's so efficient, the cost stays super low.
That's exactly what the sources are emphasizing. This whole technical setup is optimized, like laser focused on high throughput and low latency, speed and responsiveness.
Which are absolutely critical.
Critical, yeah. If you're trying to build infrastructure for, say, financial markets that need to handle huge volumes instantly, the sources also mention it's pretty energy efficient compared to some others, which, doesn't hurt its appeal.
And okay, why does this tech detail matter to you, the listener? Because this speed and low cost, they aren't just nice to haves.
No.
They are the absolute foundation, the prerequisite, really, for blockchain to handle what real-world finance demands.
Hmm.
Without that kind of performance, all the other stuff your sources talk about, scaling DeFi, bringing institutions in, tokenizing assets, it just wouldn't be practical.
It enables everything else.
Right. It's the base layer that makes the rest potentially viable.
And building right on top of that foundation, the sources spent a lot of time on Solana's role in powering decentralized finance, DeFi.
Yeah, the material paints this picture of a really vibrant DeFi ecosystem taking off on Solana.
Makes sense, right? If the network underneath is fast and cheap.
It just makes using DeFi protocols so much smoother, more affordable for everyone.
Uh-huh.
And the sources give concrete examples. Big decentralized exchanges. DEXs, they mentioned Jupiter and Radium. Also, platforms for lending and borrowing crypto. Core DeFi stuff.
Right.
And users can interact with these things almost instantly without getting killed by high transaction fees, which can be a real problem on other networks.
So if you're trying to, say, swap one token for another or maybe earn some interest, the speed means it happens fast. And the low cost means the fees don't just eat up all your potential gains.
Exactly. And for developers, it opens the door to building more complex things, more interactive apps that maybe just wouldn't even be feasible if every click cost a lot or took ages to confirm. So thinking about this for you listening, what's the takeaway? Well, DeFi is all about creating a more open, maybe more accessible financial system.
That's the promise, yeah.
And these sources seem to suggest that Solana's performance could be the thing that lets that vision actually scale up, move beyond just the crypto-native crowd, and potentially impact finance more broadly.
Making it usable for more people, basically.
Now, moving a bit beyond just crypto assets, the sources get into something with maybe even bigger potential to, like, bridge the old world and the new. Tokenizing real-world assets, RWS.
Yeah, this is where things get potentially massive. RWA tokenization, it's basically representing ownership of real stuff. Could be real estate, could be commodities, maybe even company stock as digital tokens on a blockchain.
So instead of like a paper deed or share certificate in a vault somewhere,
Yeah.
you could hold a digital token on Solana that represents your piece of ownership.
Precisely. And the sources explain how Solana's platform helps make this happen. By putting these assets onto the blockchain as tokens, you can do interesting things. You can unlock liquidity for assets that are usually hard to sell quickly.
Right.
You can fractionalize them, break them into smaller pieces. Imagine owning like a tiny fraction of a commercial building or a piece of expensive art. Things most people normally couldn't invest in.
Well, that could really open up access, couldn't it? Access to investment opportunities that have historically been, well, pretty exclusive.
Big time.
Yeah.
And the sources point to a specific feature on Solana they call token extensions. Apparently, these are pretty important for RWAs.
Token extensions. How so?
Well, the material suggests they're not just basic tokens. They can be programmed with built-in rules. Rules you need for real-world assets, especially if institutions are going to get involved.
Like compliance rules.
Exactly. Things like checking who's allowed to hold the token, automatically handling dividend payouts, maybe enforcing transfer restrictions. Stuff like that can potentially be baked right into the token itself.
Okay, that makes sense for bridging to the regulated world. So again, for you listening, why pay attention to RWA tokenization on Solana?
Well, this area could potentially unlock literally trillions of dollars in value, making assets that are currently stuck or only available to a few suddenly tradable on a global, potentially 204/7 market.
It could fundamentally change how we think about owning things, owning value, opening up completely new ways to invest.
Yeah, it's a huge potential shift.
And this kind of leads into another major theme in your source material, the increasing interest from the traditional financial players, TradFi, as they say.
Right. This is a pretty big deal.
It feels significant, yeah. The sources mention some big global names, not just watching, but actively exploring or even using Solana. They name Visa, Stripe. R3 is mentioned too.
Yeah, when companies like that start putting actual resources into understanding or building on a platform, it gives it a certain legitimacy, doesn't it? It suggests they see something real in the underlying tech.
It means they're looking at that speed and low cost we talked about and thinking, could we actually use this for our massive operations?
Exactly. And the sources talk about something designed specifically to help them do that. Solana permissioned environments, or SPEs.
SPEs.
Yeah, the material describes these as kind of secure sandboxes, controlled spaces within the main Solana ecosystem where institutions can operate but still meet their own, strict regulatory and compliance needs.
So it's like a walled garden, but connected, an on-ramp for the big players that need more control.
Kind of, yeah, a compliant way for them to tap into the core benefits of the network. And Solana Pay gets mentioned as a practical example of how this could impact payments, especially like cross-border stuff, making it faster and cheaper.
Okay, so connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Why should you care if big banks or payment companies are looking at Solana?
Because their involvement is a really strong signal. These companies, they move carefully, they have huge legacy systems. Them seriously considering Solana suggests it's moving beyond just the crypto world. It's being evaluated as potentially part of the, the core plumbing of global finance in the future.
Okay, but the source material isn't just hype, right?
Yeah.
It does acknowledge that this isn't all smooth sailing. There are challenges.
Oh, absolutely. No technology, especially one moving this fast, is perfect. The sources are pretty upfront about the hurdles.
And what are the main ones they flag?
Well, one that comes up is network stability. The sources do mention past problems, outages the network experienced,
Yeah, I remember hearing about those.
right? But they also stress that there's been intense focus and a lot of development work going into making the network much more resilient, which, it has to be if it wants to be financial infrastructure. That's table stakes.
Non-negotiable, really. And what about the centralization concerns? That's something you hear sometimes.
That's in there too, yeah. The sources address the criticism that running a Solana validator, because it needs powerful hardware for that speed,
Hmm.
could lead to maybe fewer players being able to participate, raising centralization questions.
Right.
They acknowledge that viewpoint, but also talk about the efforts to make validating more accessible over time, aiming for, broader participation and greater decentralization as things mature.
And the other big one, critical for any kind of mainstream adoption, especially with TradFi
Finally,
regulation.
absolutely essential. The material highlights the need for clear regulatory frameworks globally, for
Right.
institutions to really jump in, for RWA tokenization to hit its potential. You need that legal clarity.
And in navigating that, that's obviously a huge challenge, but also like a necessary step for Solana to reach its goals.
For sure, it's complex and evolving everywhere.
So from your perspective, again, why is it important to understand these challenges?
Well, it gives you a balanced picture, right?
Right.
It shows that Solana, while it has these really impressive technical specs and big ambitions, it's also dealing with real-world growing pains and obstacles.
It's not magic.
No. Understanding the challenges helps you get a more complete sense of its journey and what factors will really shape its future success.
Okay, so stepping back, taking everything from your source material, the big picture seems clear. Solana is trying hard to shift the narrative. Less speculative crypto asset.
And more fundamental infrastructure, a base layer for what finance might look like next.
And those core strengths, the speed, the low cost, the ability to scale, they're presented as exactly what's needed to overcome the limitations we see in, well, both traditional finance and maybe some earlier blockchains.
Yeah, and we saw how that foundation, according to the sources, is enabling that booming DeFi scene,
Right.
unlocking the just massive potential of tokenizing real-world assets and getting that serious nod of approval, or at least exploration, from major traditional institutions.
And yeah, challenges are definitely still there. Network resilience, the decentralization path, regulate. The sources are clear on that. But the work being done suggests a real commitment to building something robust and reliable.
So ultimately, the sources aren't just selling a vision of future finance. They're arguing that Solana is tangible infrastructure that's being built and used right now,
Yeah.
with the potential to really change how we all interact with money and assets
Yep.
globally.
And thinking about that potential change, especially that mix the sources describe, of decentralized tech meeting institutional adoption.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If platforms like this do fundamentally change things, what kinds of financial services or maybe investment opportunities that seem out of reach today might actually become available directly to you in the coming years?